The Biden trials continue. Hunter convicted, 3 felony gun charges, facing the California tax evasion charges, and now even more going on right here in Delaware this week. What is it? Well, let's find out. On the phone right now, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. There's a hearing set by the court on whether to reopen a lawsuit for Biden's Senate records. And the special counsel suggests the University of Delaware misled the courts. Tom, thanks for being on, sir.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me, Rick.
Oh, I'm really glad. Here in Delaware, yesterday, for example, I got a lot of phone calls. Some people were upset, and many people were happy. The Bidens are very, very controversial here in Delaware for a number of different reasons. And now I find this interesting, and I think the audience will as well, that you now have a hearing that's been set by the court on whether to reopen this lawsuit for Biden's Senate records. Tell us more.
So we had asked the University of Delaware for access to Senate records, I guess under the impression that the University of Delaware was a taxpayer-funded institution and that records they had were open to the public. Oh, well, that was a controversy. And we had this case, and it went up and down to the Supreme Court, I think, twice there in Delaware. And it was about whether or not government money was used to fund the retention of those records. Uh-huh. They didn't even want to give us the copy of the deal they had with Joe Biden to keep the records secret. And the university kept on saying, we didn't spend any taxpayer money here. No university funds were used. And then, that kept us out of court effectively, right? And so the case was ended. We couldn't get access to the records. And we're suing with our friends at the Daily Caller News Foundation, which is a journalist entity. Uh-huh. And they said specifically in their affidavit to get us thrown out of court that no consideration was paid to President Biden, state-funded or otherwise, in connection with his papers. But to the contrary, as we highlight in the report or in our filing with the court, the special counsel found, and this is a quote, that Mr. Biden asked 2 of his former longtime Senate staffers to review his boxes in courtesy storage, so his Senate records. The staffers were paid by the University of Delaware to perform the pre-gift review. How does that fit in with what they otherwise represented to the court? And that's why we went back and we asked the state court to reopen the case in light of this new evidence. And tomorrow there in Delaware, there's going to be a hearing on it.
Yeah. Let me ask a couple questions here to get a better understanding, please. So Senator Biden donates tens of thousands of papers to University of Delaware. Is that where we're starting with this conversation?
Yes.
Okay. So he donates all these papers. Now, somebody
it's a donation. We're presuming it's a donation.
Yeah.
But there you go.
Somebody has to curate the papers, has to be paid to store the papers, arrange them, organize them, provide access. The university has an expense in storing the papers somewhere, and the University of Delaware is indeed taxpayer funded. As a matter of fact, every year, Tom, Delaware taxpayers give about $110 to $130 million to UD. Now, what you've encountered is not unusual here in Delaware. In fact, there's a former state rep who's a Democrat, and I agreeing, as well as many others who didn't want to say so out loud, though, that the University of Delaware is a public institution when they want your money. They are a private institution when you want details on how they spend that money. And that, you're chuckling at that, but I'll tell you, man, I mean, for the last 20, 24 years or so.
Exactly what we found.
This is how UD operates. So it just seems to me the idea that there's no taxpayer money going into storing or curating or taking care of Biden's records is nonsense. And quite honestly,
it is nonsense.
But I don't see why
the court bought it, but with nothing we could do when the University of Delaware gets the Supreme Court to come down on its side.
So what is it you're actually looking for?
Well, we want access to the records. Okay, he's the president of the United States. his records as a senator are inherently interesting and of the public interest. And so it ought to be a non-controversial point that a public official's Senate records held by, as you highlight, a publicly funded institution should be subject to public disclosure. And the deal supposedly that they had with Joe Biden was none of this would become public until after he left political office. So, that's not a reason to withhold records from us under the law. And what they did was to your point of view and your Democratic buddy, they told the court, well, we looked at the budget numbers and we didn't see any government money being used here, so don't worry about it.
Okay. Now, we all know that's ludicrous. But I'm really, really interested to know if you're looking for anything specific. For example, we do know from a lot of reporting that donations to University of Delaware, like University of Pennsylvania, have come from, allegedly, from Chinese donors, those who are anonymous, and those who are allegedly tied to the Chinese Communist Party. Those donations going to the University of Delaware, as well as UPenn. Are you looking for that sort of information?
Yeah, that sort of information might be responsive. I have to go back and look at our initial request for the records about the deal, because that's what we've sued on, are records about the deal. So that type of material might be responsive. And there are controversies from his days as a senator that are going to be of particular interest to folks, besides his mishandling and stealing, evidently, of classified information in a criminal way that was not prosecuted by her. The allegations of his sexual misconduct, those records might reflect how those were handled. And, he was promoting how he talked to all these foreign leaders as head of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. Uh-huh. Well, that would be interesting to see what he was doing as a senator in light of the fact of him running the country now and being our chief representative abroad. So I don't need to convince you, probably don't need to convince any of your listeners, even those who support Joe Biden, that this is a sort of the record that we ought to have access to. And obviously, if there's personal or material that wouldn't be appropriate for public release, there are ways to withhold that under the law. Here we're getting zero access to zero records. It's really disturbing. We had that problem. We had a similar problem up in Vermont back in the day. Now that you mention it, with Howard Dean, he kept his records secret for years, and the Supreme Court up there protected him. So here the court did give us a fair hearing, but I think they were persuaded, or they gave too much deference to the university in their analysis of their own budget, and didn't let us get behind that.
Well, that's not atypical here in Delaware, with the university especially. It's not, and you're also dealing with a state that's pretty small. I mean, only within the last couple of years do we hit 1 million people in the entire state. Rhode Island's smaller, and they have more people in Providence than we have in the entire state of Delaware. So there is what I like to call this 1 degree of separation in Delaware. And as a friend of mine once said many, many years, Delaware, you're dated, mated, or related. So when you when you're doing business in Delaware on this level, business is not done in Delaware on a transactional basis. It's really all about relationships. It really is. And you can ask your attorney about that if you get a chance to have a cup of coffee with the judge after you're done with this case and everything. I think you'll learn the same thing. In fact, I know both these people who are on this case because, again, it's Delaware. How you cut through that, I don't know. I was pretty amazed when I was reading the stories about the archivists trying to find all his papers from President Biden from when he was a senator, and I read some reports suggesting that they didn't even have access to some of the records there at the university. I thought, well, that's actually remarkable. But again, I go back to the first question I had for you, which is based upon the fact that analysis from the Government Accountability Institute analysis shows that the University of Delaware received more than $6.7 million in secret Chinese Communist Party donations, including direct funding from the Chinese government, after Joe Biden set up a program there in his name. And now the investigation, I think, might be warranted to determine whether the funds could be traced back to Hunter, because Hunter reportedly orchestrated the funding of the Penn Biden Center and spent years profiting off business connections in China, known to be closely connected with Chinese intelligence, as well as University of Delaware. So that's why I was wondering, considering the contemporary concerns, is that part of what you're specifically looking for?
Well, I'll tell you, I pulled up the lawsuit.
Yeah.
All records regarding the proposed release of the records pertaining to Joe Biden's tenure as a senator. The request includes all related records of communications between the university and any other records created pertaining to any meeting of the board during which the proposed release of the records were discussed. All records of communications between any representative of the university and Vice President Biden. And then the lawsuit also asked for all agreements concerning the storage of the records, communications between the staff and the university of the library there and Joe Biden, who was looking at the records, and all records, obviously, that are there. So one could argue that some of that donation material might pop up in the first part of the request I read to you. But I tell you, if the court rules that the government funding here triggers the FOIA, as her report suggests, then there could be additional inquiries into the donations related to the retaining of these records.
Well, you might be going up against people who have
Is that my nice? I'm not guaranteeing it, but
I know. I get it. In other words, it's and for somebody who listens to you and says, "Oh, it sounds like a fishing expedition." No, Tom already answered at the very, very beginning that the goal is to get all these records to the public because Joe is a public figure, and they have been donated to a taxpayer-funded institution, the University of Delaware. So taxpayers, everybody has a right to see what these are. Have I summarized your mission statement properly there?
Yes, and the University of Delaware should stop protecting Joe Biden and just provide access to the public to his public records. And to me, it's a really simple equation.
So, into the weeds a bit.
I mean, we'd be having this debate if it were Donald Trump.
I don't know. I really don't know. Are you presuming if it was UD that they would release all Trump's stuff if they had it?
I think there'd be a lot more public opprobrium on it.
Wow, look at
from
you.
The media.
Look at you with the multisyllabic words there, Tom.
I'm risking a pronunciation of a word I've read but never heard.
You must be reading some old William F. Buckley Jr. writings there to pull out a word like that, man. It's good stuff. It's funny. No, I understand where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from.
And for, yeah.
And what you're going for. That was Freudian, I suppose.
Yeah.
In what ways, specifically, did UD mislead the court?
They told the court they didn't give Biden any consideration, public or otherwise,
okay,
and for these records. And they did. They paid for his staff to get the records to them.
How, and in that, how do you also, perhaps, if it's your goal, prove that they misled the court overall because they are funded with taxpayer dollars? And I don't know, maybe they have accountants with PhDs who are so good at compartmentalizing the money that they could present in court and say, see, no taxpayer money went to this. But we're talking, again, about curating, storing, managing. You have people, you have facilities for all these papers. Is there a way for you to find out if they indeed misled the court on the very basic of their statement?
Well, we think that's part of that is basic to their statement. I mean, that arguably just that statement alone, if they were giving money to collect the papers, would trigger the FOIA. Mm-hmm. And they went out of their way to say that our records show that's not the case, that there was no public money. And so, the case is, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just I'm head of Judicial Watch. I'm not the lawyer. I'm the client.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm concerned, case closed. In terms of we win, and they have to disclose records. But we'll see what the court thinks about all of this and how far or what other inquiry how far the court wants to go, if he agrees with us as to what the conclusions he would draw from that, and then, potentially what other information he wants before he makes any decision.
Judge,
so we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow necessarily, but it's good that and I know University of Delaware is a big foot up there in Delaware.
It is.
But the wonderful thing about the court process, even in Delaware, which is, as you point out, a small town, you're on equal footing with the University of Delaware and the court. And that's all we're asking for, is a fair hearing from the courts. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But it's a great system still that little old Judicial Watch and the Daily Caller News Foundation can, get some accountability from the university over their handling of these records.
So this seems to be just the beginning of the process. What constitutes a win for Judicial Watch if you come out of the hearing and Judge Ferris Wharton says what? What does he say that constitutes a win for you in this hearing tomorrow?
I agree with Tom Fitton, case closed.
Yeah.
Give him the darn document.
It's highly unlikely.
This is the beginning of another process. And I think, and if the process continues, that will be a nice victory. I mean, if the court says there's nothing here, and I'm satisfied, and thanks for trying, I'm going to issue opinion in accordance with my ruling, then, that would be a loss.
Good to hear from you again, Tom. It's been a while. I don't think you and I have spoken, I said out the air, since like 2016 or 17, right around in there, I think.
Yeah, well, the problem is time goes on, it doesn't seem that long.
No.
Even if it's 8 years.
Yeah, yeah, I know. What's the saying? I got one. It's like, time sure flies when you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, that's pretty much
the 3 or 4 young people listening to your program don't understand what I'm saying, but
yeah.
Everyone of a normal age understands perfectly what I'm saying.
Normal age. All right, Tom. So let's follow up Friday morning if we can, and see where we go from there. All right.
Yeah, we'll see what we hear.
All right, my friend. It's Tom Fitton, the Grand Poobah at Judicial Watch, and has been for many, many years. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.